Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today I am putting out some of Clif High's Alta Reports. A few years ago, he released a bunch of his reports for free for anyone who wanted to download them from his website, Half Past Human, but I don't believe they're there anymore. I got these quite a few years back when he offered them to the public for free, and so I had saved them on a computer, but if you're someone like me, I don't really retain good information by reading things, but I do like listening to them and I absorb more information, I think, by listening. And I think a lot of people are like that with so many YouTube videos and podcasts. Everyone is used to now listening to things instead of reading them. So that's why I'm putting them up on YouTube, because I couldn't really find any good audio anywhere else. So I made my own and I thought I'd share that with you. So this is just the introduction. I will put some timestamps for when the actual reading of the Alta report takes place. I'm putting it here on YouTube because I think it's really relevant to the things that are happening right now. Even though these reports are 10 years old, they become more relevant. So I think I want to kind of help put the information out there about what was in them. And now a few years have passed, people might have forgotten what was in some of his reports. And this is just a quick intro. If you want to skip ahead, I'll always put the marker of when the actual reading of the report starts as I upload these. So enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Introduction. Predictive linguistics is the process of using computer software to aggregate vast amounts of written text from the internet by categories delineated by emotional content of the words. Predictive linguistics uses emotional qualifiers and quantifiers, expressed as numeric values, for each and all words/phrases discovered/filtered in the aggregation process. Over 80% of all the words gathered will be discarded for one or more reasons. Predictive linguistics works as no-conscious expressions are processed through the software. Rather, the contexts discussed within the report in the form of entities and linguistic structures, see below, are read up in the various intake software programs, and the emotional sums of the language found at that time are retrieved. Words that are identified within my system as descriptors are passed through the processing as well. These descriptor words, in the main, are those words and phrases that provide us with the detail sets within the larger context sets. As an example, the word prophecy may be read up by our software at a sports-oriented forum. In that case, perhaps, due to the emotional sums around the context, and the emotional values of the word itself within the lexicon, it would be put into the contextual bin within the database as a detail word. Note that the context of the use of the word in the sports forum is lost in the process and is of no use to us in these circumstances. What occurs is that the word is picked up as being atypical in its context, therefore of high potential leakage of future value. The way this works is that most sports forum language about future events would be statistically more likely to use words such as bet, as in I bet this XXX will be outcome, or I predict, or I think that XXX will happen. So it is the context plus emotional values plus rarity of use within the context that flags words for inclusion in the detail level of the database. Further, it is worth noting that most detail level words are encountered in our processing mere days before their appearance. Within the IM data primarily, and then within ST data next. But a preponderance are discovered within the IM time period. Perhaps an artifact of our processing, if so, one not explored due to lack of time, Cosmic Joke noted. Words are linked by their array values back to the lexicon using our set theory model, see below, and the language used within the interpretation, detail words accepted, derives from the lexicon and its links to the changing nature of contexts as they are represented within our model. Predictive linguistics is a field that I pioneered in 1993. The software and lexicon has been in continual change/update mode since. This is due to the constantly changing nature of language and human expression. Predictive linguistics works to predict future language about, perhaps, future events, due to the nature of humans. It is my operating assumption that all humans are psychic, though the vast majority do nothing to cultivate it as a skill, and are likely unaware of it within themselves. In spite of this, universe and human nature has it that they leak prescient information out continuously in their choice of language. My software processing collects these leaks and aggregates them against a model of a timeline, and that information is provided in this report. The ALTA report is an interpretation of the asymmetric trends that are occurring even this instant as millions of humans are typing billions of words on the internet, The trends are provided in the form of a discussion of the larger collections of data, dubbed entities, down to the smallest aspect/attribute swept up from daily discussions within that context. Within the Alta Report format, detail words are provided as noted below. Phrases and idiomatic expressions are also provided as details. In the main, geographic references are merely summed, and if deemed pertinent, the largest bag in the collection is discussed as a probable or possible location to the events being referenced within the details. In our discussions, the interpretation is provided in a nested, set theory, fuzzy logic pattern. Definitions, aspects/attributes are collections of data that are within our broader linguistic structures and are the supporting sets that provide our insight into future developments. The aspect/attribute sets can be considered as the brought-along serendipitous future forecasts by way of links between words in these sets and the lexicon. Entities are the master sets at the top of our nested linguistic structures and contain all reference that center around the very broad labels that identify the entity, markets, GlobalPop, and SpaceGoatFarts, as examples. Lexicon is, at its core level, the lexicon is a digital dictionary of words in multiple languages/alphabets stripped of definitions other than such technical elements as parts of speech identifiers. The lexicon is quite large and is housed in a SQL database heavily populated with triggers and other executable code for maintenance and growth. Human language expands continuously, so the lexicon must as well. Conceptually, at the Prolog software engine processing level, the lexicon is a predicate assignment of a complex, multi-dimensional array of integers to labels, each of which is a word within the lexicon. The integers within the 8x8x10 level array structure are composed of emotional qualifiers, which are assigned numeric representations of the intensity, duration, impact, and other values of the emotional components given by humans to that word. And also contain emotional quantifiers, which are assigned numeric representations of the degree of each of the cells' level of emotional assignment. Spiders are software programs that once executed are self-directing, within programmed limits, thus are called bots, and within these constraints are allowed to make choices as to linguistic trails to explore on the internet. The job of the spiders is to search, retrieve and pre-process, part of the exclusions process that will see 90% of all returned data eliminated from consideration in our model, the linguistic bytes, 2048 words/phrases in multi-byte character format, which are aggregated into our model space when processing is complete. List of entities explored in this report. GlobalPop. The GlobalPop entity represents the linguistic sets within the data that are focused on the future of humanity, local or global. The local future focused language is aggregated into our global future language sets. This entity is independent of language, alphabet, or script form, and thus is our deepest and broadest set for emotional quantifiers and qualifiers about humanity's future. USAPop, and any other nation-state/territorial reference, all subsets of the populace of the planet, within our model space are identified by either a geospatial term such as a regional terrestrial label, e.g., AlpinePop, or a geopolitical label, e.g., CanadaPop. These are used to isolate the subset of the global populace to which the terms are being applied in the forecast. The terrestrial references are frequently used to provide a context of shared views/concerns, as in those things all mountain-dwelling people will have in common separate from other humans. Markets. The markets entity is a superset of linguistic structures covering paper debt markets of all kinds, commodity trading markets, physical swap markets, currency usage, within populace, digital currency developments, new technology and fintech. Terra. The Terra entity is the master set for all structures that relate to the planet and the physical environment of planet Earth. This master set frequently and increasingly has extensive cross-links to the SpaceGoatFarts entity. SpaceGoatFarts. This master set is where all data that fits under the context of and arrives. Our processing discovered significant amounts of data of the and over 2000 to 2003, which led to the creation of the separate entity view labeled SpaceGoatFarts. As may be expected, this set contains the references to UFOs, Area 51, breakaway civilization, and other woo-woo subjects. Data types IM equals immediacy data with forecasting effectiveness from 3 days to the end of the 3rd week. Error range is 4 weeks. ST equals shorter term data with forecasting effectiveness from the 4-week out through and inclusive the end of the 3-month, from date of interpretation. Error range equals 4 months. LT equals longer term data with forecasting effectiveness from the end of the 3-month out through and inclusive of the end of the 19-month. Error range equals 19 months. Terms employed, cross-links, links from one cell in the database and its software representation to another due to a shared linguistic structure or pattern. Linguistic structure. In my model space, a linguistic structure is a master set and all its contained subsets, also known as directly held subsets. At the very highest level, each and all entities within my model are linguistic structures, which, in their turn, are composed of many subsets of other linguistic structures. Model space allows for 256 layers of nesting of these sets and subsets, each of which can and may be a complex set of its own. Obviously, the model is derived from object-oriented programming at its highest level. Metadata layer. In model space, when a meme appears directly held in numerous sets, at the same level of support, it is labeled as a metadata layer. These layers can be thought of as a common linguistic structure that forms with differing supporting sets in the various entities. For clarity, a meme in Terra entity would not have the same supporting sets as that same meme in the GlobalPop entity, but both would be part of the larger metadata layer that the meme reveals. Model space. In the interpretation, the data sets are represented on screen in a virtual box fashion in which a 3D box is drawn and the lexicon-linked words from the latest data processing are shown within the 3D box by position and color, brightness and hue of the individual pixels. Using an algorithm of my own design and the predicate calculus of the Prolog programming language, model space is populated by these database representations in a manner that resembles scatter graphs, but at a 3-dimensional level. By toggling on or off several advanced feature S of our 3D box software, the various levels of data and cross-links and other technical elements may be displayed. MOM, model of model space. In the very first public release of information from my process, a self-referencing loop was created by internet articles about the release, and thus the next time the spiders were invoked, the process crashed on self-referential, circuitous references to my own work. As a corrective measure, MOM, models of model space, was devised as my very improvement on the process. MOM holds a copy of my interpretation as well as links to areas on the net to exclude from consideration within the predictive linguistic work. Set. Our approach involves the use of complex, fuzzy, set theory originating in the software industry's quest for intelligent machines or AI, artificial intelligence. In our approach, the fuzzy sets are based on the ability to define such concepts as near, close to, about, and like among many others which provide me the ability to assign a numeric representation as a quantifier to human emotions, which are the key element to future forecasting from predictive linguistics. Temporal echo. These are linguistic echoes across time that will reference the same, previously forecast, meme and its emotional parameters. The language manifest in both instances, that is, the temporal, meme, anchor and its echo will be related to each other, though frequently the repeating echo is larger in both scope and intensity. In some cases, the meme is completed in our predictive linguistic sense of that word by the echo phase of the meme. TM equals temporal marker. Think of this as a bookmark against which you may remember specific details of the forecast. These are chosen due to some, more or less, easily identified linguistic telltale that we expect to show up in the forecast language within media discussions. Data and interpretation. There are several major trends that are either peaking, merging, or crossing in the data sets. These trends are reflections of the motivation mass emotions affecting humanity. While there are repressed emotional needs for home rule and core people's language present, there are also other memes for escape from near-feudal repression and expansive potential that are going to drive headlong into the self-releasing, long-repressed, homing language. Other major trends that are crossing include the pressing of the illusion of paper versus the reality of decaying paper-based debt economics. Basically, once someone has won all the script money in the game of Monopoly, it is no longer fun to play. Oh, and the board is about to be kicked. Terra planetary changes are still showing as being the primary mover of humanity over the rest of 2016 and beyond. The data sets continue to grow in support of diaspora, and it is clear that there are to be many causes showing up beneath our feet, or from the sky over our heads for a number of years. The Terra entity has new longer-term sets that are forecasting the major changes in the planet to be impacting through 2045 and then waning with intermittent bursts of activity for the next 84 years, for generations more or less. The mane of the horse is a reference that has been gaining new supporting subsets over the last 2 processing periods. In this instance, there are no less than 4 large geographic regions that are referenced as being part of the horse, which is a land feature. These include the Middle East, a section of the Caucasus Mountains, a section of the western ridge of mountains in Mexico, and an extensive area in the Badlands, western USA, also including parts of Utah and Nevada. Without regard to which of these 4 regions is being described, the data sets are accruing for a breakdown of the sub-base material that in turn leads to sudden channeling in the surface of the region. The channeling is described as sort of a riverbed look to it, but water is not involved, at least not on the surface effect. The data shows that in a similar fashion to the disappearing rivers which are here this evening and gone the next morning, this channeling of the surface of the Earth is supported by rapid, overnight, within vision, watching it occur in many other such sets, including support for video to be released of the event phenomenon as it rolls across the landscape. The details have sets for housing developments being sunken into shallow ravines as the channeling occurs in their area. The dipping and running dimples of the landscape are described as taking out roads, toppling water towers and caving in long streets, where further details show that rooftops of houses on opposite sides of the street will be touching as the street sinks away below the houses. Not only will airline pilots and air traffic controllers be upset by the new wind patterns forecast to be developing over the next few years, but they will also be put to new work trying to cope with the reversal of long-running global wind patterns. Other areas of human activity including power generation from wind farms, and crop planting and forecasting, and ocean transport are indicated to also be affected by the increasing winds activity and the reversal of flow patterns. The increasing winds activity has very large areas indicating that both upper atmosphere winds and surface of the planet winds will be drastically changed over next 4 years, as well as substantially increased in forces transmitted. As far as this latter set, the data is showing that ocean transport including cruise ships will be significantly impacted as the ships are described as being delayed, slowed, misdirected, pushed about by the increased wind force at the surface of the planet. This is indicated as a cause in a number of boat race accidents to be seen across the northern hemisphere this summer and fall. Whereas in past Alta reports we have had flooding be a dominant factor in many entities, in this report we have winds taking over that role. The number of new sets in supporting position across all of model space that have winds as a directly held value has escalated to overtake the flooding language by about 10%. This is an exceptional shift in our data processing history as the flooding set has been the dominant set for at least 4 years. Even pollution patterns are indicated to be altered by the reversal of the winds and the increasing wind activity. The wind's change is shown as moving masses of, probably Chinese, pollution that will then be affecting new areas and causing new protests and disturbing health changes. These sets are also filling with data showing that some rich enclaves will be the new bitching centers as suddenly their clean environment becomes smothered as the new winds will blow pollutants the wrong way. These sets have many cross-links over to the SpaceGoatFarts entity where we have terminating sets indicating that bizarre schemes will be put forward by the rich, now suffocating under new pollution. Other problems to be caused by the new winds, especially the reversal of old patterns, are indicated to include power plant problems, including shutdowns and shutoffs, and, curiously, urban flooding where there are pattern-dependent urban planning features. There are also pointers for birds flying into many different kinds of human habitation and technology as their systems are sent into dysfunction. The data further shows that forests, individual trees, and small stands of timber, all being pushed from the wrong way, will be falling over in a global, ongoing, winds disaster. The data further suggests that the shifting winds will take some time to percolate into the general awareness, and then it will take even longer for the shifting winds patterns across the face of the planet coming to general awareness, as most humans will think, for a long time, that the winds are a local phenomenon. Notwithstanding the winds and their impacts on ocean activities of humanity, the Terra sets are quite clear that the ocean deeps will be a subject occupying more of our time in the near-term future as water levels are suggested to lower against the EuropeanPop standards. These sets are suggesting that the ocean levels relative to port facilities will be dropping to the point that humans will notice. Mostly the reason we are going to notice the dropping ocean levels is that stuff won't fit work at various ports around our planet, which will get our attention and lead to all kinds of wild-ass theories. There are a number of new sets accruing to the channeling that are forecasting it to appear, or be noticed, at the bottom of the ocean. These new subsea channels are in the supporting sets for an expansion episode in which the mantle stretches and the subsequent increase in total planetary surface area is indicated to draw down the ocean levels. This is not described as being an instant kind of thing around the planet. In the data, the new sets are actually describing a number of years in which there is a raging debate as to what the hell is going on with ocean levels. This is described as being due to the slow or creeping nature of the ocean drawdown. The data is quite clear that it will take a number of years for the ocean drawdown to become noticed at a global level. Some other Earth expansion effects will not have to wait so long to be noticed. These are going to include even some very damn rural areas where the spreading of the mantle is described as stretching out, flattening, making oblate, shortening, crumbling, collapsing, and destroying the walls of mine tunnels. Other effects such as road separations, and rock walls, crumbling, and flooding, and tilting, slanting, going off-kilter such that trucks slide off the formerly level roads, are attached in support of open mines being destroyed by the upwelling of mantle separation effects. The data sets are forecasting that global mine production, already facing problems via the upcoming credit freeze situation, is also going to be reduced by the impact on mines of stretching Earth and relaxing Earth. These sets are showing that what we once thought to be solid is anything but. Yet more instances of Earth expansion effects messing with human infrastructure are showing up in detail sets indicated breaks in subsea cabling, as well as shifts in relative position of surface features, causing such problems as navigation aids, for both boats and aircraft, being obscured hidden, and satellite systems that will report inaccurately as their points of reference are now closer or further apart than before. Along with the reversed winds phenomenon developing globally, there are also continuation sets for jet streams, dropping down, and bringing some airplanes along, as well as wind tsunamis that will actually roar across the landscape. Other atmosphere issues include sudden decompression of ordinary, although high up places. The effects are described in the data as people passing out while skiing or at ski resorts. This is showing up as something of a sensation, albeit brief, as several ski resorts, at about the same altitude, experience the sudden decompression of the atmosphere phenomenon. There are a number of rescue language sets going to winds at sea being too fierce for cruise ships, and again a continuing growth in sets for a very large rescue effort in which the early hours, days, are too windy to extract passengers from the listing vessel. The data sets are indicating that it will all work out in a positive manner, more or less, but that the early days are going to be both nail-biters and traumatic for all concerned, including those who only watch the rescue drama. The data sets for a large and damaging earthquake in western China is still building new supporting sets, albeit slowly. There are larger builds for a very damaging earthquake within the longer-term data sets primarily, which are known to be unreliable as to timing, for North America. There are also sets for the sinkhole stitchery to crack Japan, and to induce both a minor tsunami, affecting Hawaii hardly at all, and an echo earthquake along the California coast. Again, most of these new sets are longer term and are focusing more on mid-2017 and beyond. The earthquakes in China are not limited to the far western regions. We have a number of sets for the intrusion of a substantial earthquake that will disable industrial shipments and disturb port facilities on the northern Chinese coast. What makes this earthquake notable is the presence of a number of foreign ships and dignitaries, both of which are showing as being damaged, at least to the extent of eliciting international press coverage. Other ChinaPop future news is going to consist of rumors that will be circulating in the technology circles, hardware and replications, about a space payoff for Chinese manufacturing. While there are a large number of references to unknown and thus many links over to the SpaceGoatFarts entity, the majority of the external cross-link sets are to the Markets entity, where the terminating sets are for the new electrics and energy, and it would appear, the welding cutting, at molecular level. These sets are also filled with bespoke secrecy and central authorities, so it is likely that the rumors are all that will materialize until those same authorities so permit. However, it is noteworthy that the rumors appearing about space payoffs for China are coincident with the re-engineering of copper at an atomic level, and the first of the new electrics to appear as a result of that are not far behind. There are new sets hinting that the hemispheres will start to blend. This is apparently a reference to cross-equatorial ocean currents that are going to be new and act as new heat carriers. These new heat carriers are showing up as creating new weather patterns, some of which are going to contain the popcorn storms indicated to make their first appearance this year. What makes this set of interest is not the storm's potential, but rather the continuous references to how scientists and science publications will be using the new word to describe the changing heat distribution mechanisms of the planet. The data would have the joining of the currents be both ocean and atmosphere, and the point of the process is part of the self-regulating nature of Earth heat distribution system. These sets have the new heat patterns being a supporting component of the reversal of the winds and the creation of a new, strange weather patterns and types. Look for the new label to be used by weather services globally. The joining of the currents has sub-sets that bring in the idea of giant, revolving storms that will be created by the tangential collision of jet stream winds. These giant rotating storms are not showing as hurricanes, but rather as stationary conditions that can be bypassed and maneuvered around. While not really stationary, these are described as so slow-moving as to be mostly bound in place insofar as humans are concerned. The secondary supporting structures are going to the idea of impact from the rotating, giant, low pressures as requiring new sea lanes and obscuring satellite observations of the regions under the clouds. Note that so far as can be determined now, none of these heat transfer regions are over land. There are some hints in the longer-term data values in the supporting chain for these sets that the heat transfer rotating low-pressure cells may, at some more distant time, join up into bands or collections of such storm cells for short periods. The blending hemispheres language is part of the expansion of the Earth sets. These new additions are forecasting some really strange stuff coming to oceans and other bodies of water, including the atmosphere, near you. Some of these new strange stuff, climate weather episodes, are forecast to include dancing water spouts that will chase and damage several speedboats at a party. The images are showing scattered cans bottles floating and overturned, expensive speedboats and crying women in the water, and dazed and bleeding young men and debris over a wide multiple-mile area. Other strange stuff, weather, that will be attacking the population shows up in detail sets for summer music festivals that are wind-swept, suddenly, and destroyed, tents ripped, stages broken, people bleeding and on stretchers, as freezing squalls come from very high atmosphere to rain down ice balls, the size of drink cups, furiously for many intense minutes. Part of the forecast language is going to be about how shockingly brief the storm was given the huge amount of human and property damage. There are also other areas describing mountain cable cars that will require rescue when ice storms come in and coat everything, causing the machinery to seize up fail. Yet more Earth expansion symptoms are described as altering canals in several areas in the northern hemisphere. In some of these instances, the canals are described as being closed due to blockages caused by the recent local expansion effect. Some of these canals carry commercial traffic. Other expansion effects on ocean sets include the previously mentioned ports no longer useful as the facilities are too far away from the water. These sets are now gaining support from new aspect attribute sets for the unusual and excessive precipitation as also being a factor in a few of the port's problem sets, as we have forecast devastating rain storms that are going to wash away the hillsides and bring them rushing down upon the local port. The data is suggesting that several videos will be available this year showing buildings and debris including cars, buses, trucks, and cranes being washed down hillsides to come crashing into port facilities as the local population stares on, horrified. Further, in at least one of these ports covered in land debris instances, the data is arguing that the regional transportation system, via ferry, will be disrupted for years. GlobalPop. The GlobalPop sets are bringing in new subsets for disruptions and upsets, overturnings and replacement, and many other descriptors going to the idea of a major social changes. The nature of the changes are diverse and show up across many different sets and entities, but are all participating in forming a picture of Western humanity in transition. The high levels of the emotional values behind the disruptions and the overturning of the existing systems are derived from the very large increase in hyperinflation language showing up. The data sets are predicting hyperinflation to be a very active word over these next 2+ years as more and more countries fall into the deflation trap. Note that the data sets are showing that all of the hyperinflation victim countries are petrodollar linked. These new hyperinflation sets are forecasting that Africa, and both North and South America, will be whipsawed by both deflation and hyperinflation over these next 2 years to such an extent that the dollar empire crumbles and nation-states recreate themselves, as well as spawn new nations. Some of these new nation-states are indicated to be geographically bound, surrounded by older, dying nations. A few of the new nation-states to emerge from within existing borders have, as their seeds, actions that will begin in 2016. Some of the supporting sets include alliances between traditional foes within the GlobalPop such as labor unions and students. The data sets are forecasting that the old tactic of divide to conquer is going to fail miserably as the dollar empire dies, taking with it many of the staples of the safety nets in society. Across much of the globe, the majority within the Northern Hemisphere, the financial resources that had fed the political diversity of the past few decades is posited to dry up in such a fashion that all of society that is social system dependent find themselves coming together, bonding, against a common enemy. The datasets are forecasting that the bonding of the distressed students and the depleted pensioners and the failing labor unions is going to create a situation within the ruling elite and the financial system in which those statists and their backers will be making several very large mistakes that will involve both bad decisions and bad behavior run amok. In these instances, the statists will find that there is no help for the cutting situation. A few other instances of the word cutting include its appearance in lexical structures that are going to the idea of the GlobalPop cutting through the knots placed on the system by the powers that be, TPTB. These sets are related to life goods, or making a living from a pile of rubble. The idea coming across is that as the global financial system goes into visible failure, there will be instances of the leading edge of GlobalPop. This leading edge is composed of people, makers-doers, who will be decided, mostly by universe prompting them, to just do it. These leading edge people are forecast to be creating new food systems, many in desolate urban environments. These sets are showing that the new leading, food growers, technology-driven edge people are showing as becoming successful in both ways and degrees totally unimagined. The idea coming across is that the financial circumstances are such that followers and students appear in giant huge overwhelming numbers, and the next thing that mainstream propaganda media knows, there is a grassroots, pun intended, college system that will be evolving globally, before their eyes. The data sets are at one level suggesting that a certain critical mass has been, or very soon will be, achieved such that social evolution change will be visibly activated. This last is an interesting note of linguistic and likely prescience interest, as we have model space in essence commenting on its source aka humanity, as being moved or altered by external forces. Kind of like your phone saying hey, it tickles ergo you must be updating some app. In this broader instance the app being updated is humanity and its perception of itself in its current history. Another way to think about this is that the data sets are forecasting that the tendency of, at least Western, humanity to live in the future via entertainment distractions is already shifting. Humanity asset big and it takes a long time to move it, and we, the aware, shall be able to perceive this shift occurring in real time over these next few years. One of the first instances of this humanity-level shift is forecast to be in the sudden, according to MSM propaganda media, appearance of the urban-centered alternative foods technology. Many of these sets and their supporting subsets are also in the chain under our previously reported, in USAPop, empty retail, malls and empty retail buildings being co-opted and repurposed. The GlobalPop entity is forecasting that the global depression brought about by the central banksters and the political authorities is but being born. The depression lexical sets are now including language around deflation. The global depression and the global deflation supporting sets are pointing toward a situation in which deflation is eating house prices, commercial real estate prices, and most other debt collateral, as there are no credit takers to continue debt-based asset growth. These sets are very confusing and bring in a number of seemingly conflicting subsets. However, the data has a pointed focus on the crumbling of the fiat currencies that are failing and falling so fast as to create greater political instability. These sets are directly tied to the rising, popular actions, and the new leadership from the core people's movements. The dynamic deflation that is the feared death disease by the central banksters' authorities is showing as being the dominant factor in the rest of 2016 and through to at least mid-2017. The data sets are forecasting that the deflation is like an aggressive cancer as the credit freeze hits various parts of the economy like an ice pick. This deflation is described as being cancerous in that it is not general or blanketing, but rather is described as eroding and tunneling, and other language that goes to the idea of a twisted, interconnected tunnels that are lacing through the financial systems. The individual detail sets are bringing up assets such as debt on real estate, debt on energy, debt on art, debt on students, debt on debts as being the origins of the tunnels. These tunnels are describing the former assets that had been, nominally, backing the debt as being destroyed, and at zero, or near zero for most of these debt-based assets. There are extensive cross-links over to the markets entity where the terminating sets include very large representation of gold, silver, and Bitcoin. The data is showing that it is the dynamic deflation that starts in the Italian banking system, which in turn is described as spreading, like mold through overripe fruit, into the global banking derivatives system. It is the derivative subset that contains most of the language for violence and disruption. Other subsets include repudiation and explosive detonation, in which a counterparty is blown up for failure to pay, all of which leads to cascading crashcade defaults and bad words between former partners. EuropeanPop. We are looking for the new leaders of the core people's movement to be stepping forward over these next 12 months. The data sets have growth around our previously mentioned street violence hero subset, and now we have new sets suggesting that the hero who will find him herself at the center of the core people's movement will backed up supported by a very astute political genius from the far north. We are getting hints that the astute political advisor forecast to create the center around the young hero has a sublimated letter in his name. We do get such language hints occasionally, and in the past they have proven valuable as temporal markers. The center, to be formed, within the core peoples is showing as overturning the local politics over much of Northern and Eastern Europe in what will be described as exceptionally fast time. In the data sets there are repeated references to the speed of the political transformation of EuropeanPop, as it will be utterly recreated in mere months. As may be expected, the tumult within the political structure of the EU is going to roll out and downhill. Unfortunately for the officialdom, the datasets are showing that the population does not follow the dictates, and by August the data is forecasting that the new meme du jour is to be the active breakup of NATO. This NATO breaks down apart meme is also providing support for the USA military unable to get soldiers back home due to economic problems subsets. A shift has occurred in the focus of much of the new growth coming into the EuropeanPop entity into a German and Austrian subsets. These sets are suggesting that there will be an attempt to enforce the EU core by groups in these countries. However, the data is also quite clear that their efforts have not chanced to succeed as failure is assured due to the rapidly unfolding global conditions which include the assault on debt-based asset prices by deflation, and debt repudiation, and debt destruction. These and many other sets are indicating that there will be turmoil in the old town tonight, metaphorically, as the Germanic peoples wrestle with the failing euro currency and the collapsing social cohesion that is being described much as the peace of the former Eastern European communist republics in which it was dictates, from above, that kept their systems together, not an organic union. The datasets are forecasting that the combination of the global credit freeze, mainly Western countries to start, and the deflation of the Italian banks, is going to disturb the Vatican as it will suddenly find that it is wrestling with debts that were hidden by paper trails. Much of this language is supported by the failing counterparty sub-sets within the dynamic deflation linguistic structures. There are a number of new sets for an incident of lost documents which will turn out to be a very large embarrassment for officialdom both before the documents, likely a computer, are found and then for months afterward. The data gives the inference that the carelessness may well be deliberate in an attempt to leak certain information, and it goes spectacularly well, if that was the intent. These sets are part of a group of 3 temporal marker linguistic structures for the longer-term value sets of the core people's movement and the Pan-Europe alliance that is indicated to be dominating the politics of both Europe and the Middle East by the early 2020s. While there are some data sets hinting that it will be NATO documents that are lost, the more interesting subsets are those providing some details as to the finders of the documents as they are described as being an alternative community from a self-governing zone. This conjunction of characteristics is what propels the contents of the documents to such prominence in such a shockingly short period. There are further sets that indicate the success of the release campaign will also be due to the diligence that the community takes in providing audio versions in multiple languages as well as the original documents, including videos. On social media video, AfricaPop large changes are suggested for both Africa the continent and AfricaPop. These changes are going to include many forms of the Earth expansion effects seen around the planet, including a new line of sinkholes that will be stitching their way across northern Africa, likely eastern coastal area. These stitch lines will, from space, be able to be used to discern the next Zanzibar. Other and different Earth expansion effects, including inland blowholes that will be spewing tidal effluents, are forecast to be something of a global sensation and an instant local tourist attraction. As an attraction, the data suggests that the blowholes will become too dangerous to be around, as they will be demonstrating both force and heat in intermittent bursts. These sets are filled with longer-term language for disaster and continent changing, and topography altering, and map changing, and other words going to the idea that these effects are going to be very disruptive to the local populations. In some of these sets there are subsets going to the idea that the blowholes and sinkholes are going to be creating side effects that will alter the Suez Canal. New sets for AfricaPop show that mining interests and energy, both solar and oil, are going to move their interests ahead by several years. The shift ahead of the plans for Africa by these multinationals are part of the ongoing crash of the financial structure. The credit freeze language does not appear to hit AfricaPop as hard as others, likely due to the movement of capital to African resource exploitation. AustraliaPop. The crushing of the high-end real estate throughout Australia is described as setting up a CNED note, may actually be used in media at some point, thus the detail levels we are getting now. In which a Foster's drinker sits on his small cement patio and points to the rich houses up the hill and derides their owners for their crying over losing a few dollars of imaginary value. The punchline to the detail sets is that our central character is focusing in on the linguistics of, why didn't he sell when he had the chance? Then the data would have it be between 6 weeks and 6 months before he is also saying the same thing about his own house. Why didn't I sell when I had the chance? The end of cycle words showing up for the Australian housing, and later, maybe 2 months trailing, property, commercial, market include both intensity and duration of impact values that suggest at least a 5 generations impact on the housing prices upon reaching the bottoming part of this process in about 4 years' time. Note that there are sets indicating that the northwest coast, specifically those hills and dry, colored crags that are facing India and are described as the receivers of the long upwelling winds, are going to lag behind and then sprint ahead of the rest of Australian housing price discovery. This wait-on-spring effect is directly held, and also internally cross-linked to the Earth expansion process and its impact on the Australian coast in that region in a few years. The expansion is indicated to crush mining, but at the same time, reveal by way of Earth shifts new veins of silver and other precious metals, including rare earths, that will revitalize the area later as new mines are created from the recently, in the future, exposed veins. Note that the appearance of the word recent in the dataset is a temporal pointer that indicates that in a not-too-distant future, the time between the first exposure of the new veins of metal ores and the beginning of the effort to exploit them would allow for the use of the word recent at that time. Let me restate this just to muddy the idea even further. Then, say a year from now, the Australians involved will be saying things like, let us go dig in that recent landslide area and get that silver, commercially. So then, that is, at the time that they voice these words, it will be only a very short period since the slide and Earth expansion. This has many levels of implications, but one of them allows us to peg our model space to these sets when they appear as a major temporal marker on the way to a sound money system globally. See Markets Entity for more on these sets. It is the sound money region that is described as being isolated from the rest of the Australian social order, as well as being physically separated, in some manner, that will be leading the land property prices back to stability over the end of this decade. This is apparently due in no small part to the ore in the ground, as there are many sets indicating that destitute homeowners, formerly, or long-time squatters, foreclosed former owners mostly, will resort to digging up their back gardens and shifting their houses to get a better digging site. Significant social order changes are described for northern and northeastern Australia as the rescue of large populations of distressed boat-borne people will become a global sensation. The data sets in these sets are primarily longer term and are seemingly describing the aftermath of a disaster of significant size to a population to the north of Australia that then has to flee the once supportive environment in many hundreds, thousands, of boats. These then become the source of the very large increase in the rescue language and also population explosion language for AusSiePop. There are a number of longer-term sets going to the idea of a political shift for Australia as the USA dollar, FRN, falls so low as to be unable to support, in purchasing power, the American military outposts inside Australia. These sets are within the supporting chain for our very long-held sets for Too Broke to Get Soldiers Back Home. These sets are now gaining new supporting sets that are filling with both shorter-term and immediacy data types, indicating that these events are now much closer. Also, we need to note that these sets are part of a larger, long-held, temporal marker that is just at the beginning of the alteration of humanity, as USA dollar empire implodes and the world of markets drastic changes. CanadaPop is showing as having similar issues to AustraliaPop as regards the USA dollar. The data sets are describing a situation in which the legs of the chair supporting the USA dollar, Federal Reserve note and the banking structure are going to go wobbly and cause downward pressures. Note that the data would seem to be suggesting directly that the Canadian dollar is among the legs that will be wobbling downward ahead of the USAFRN over these next few months and into 2017. These sets are seemingly implying that the wobble described is a rubber banding effect within the global currencies markets, as well as within each currency as regards its purchasing power. So basically the data is forecasting that the Canadian dollar, along with Aussie dollar, will be dropping ahead of the rate of fall of the USA dollar, at least for the next 2 months or so. Increasing desperation for the falling local government tax revenues appears in sets that support the idea of cooperation in an active manner with Chinese officialdom, such that Chinese capital control police will be seen on the streets of a few select Canadian cities as they work with local authorities to detain wanted individuals. It turns out it is a very small world after all. CanadaPop has new growth for crushing debt at a public service level, such that odd taxes and bonds behavior gets to the point that it becomes visible in the world markets. This appears to be a digital money creation situation that is slowly losing the ability to maintain parity with the deflationary drain that is, behind the scenes, sucking out productivity. These sets contain subsets for currency woes and currency liquidity failures that are pointing toward failing construction companies as their projects, even not completed, become worth more every day, but daily costs become too crushing to meet. CaribbePop, yet more data growing in our sets for a shipwreck, find that is going to have ancient mummies that are described as having a gut-gripping effect on the power elite. The data sets are filling with language for dangerous addiction to the knowledge, and curiosity is painful and desperate bad behavior to know. These sets are part of a larger lexical structure that has large yachts and new power centers arriving in the Caribbean following the discovery of the mummy wreck. This is indicated to be a large enough level of activity that it will show up in incidental video coverage on the net. The data suggests that the story of a trying to be quiet invasion of the affected region of the Caribbean will get out by the displacement of the cruise ships and closing of tourist spots. While there are a large number of cross-links over to the SpaceGoatFarts entity, the terminating sets are within unknown aspects, so no help there. These sets are continuing to build both shorter-term and longer-term values. The longer-term sets are post-discovery and are suggesting that the impacts will have a very long duration, whatever may be the actual discovery. These sets are also cross-linked over to the Terra and SpaceGoatFarts entity, where we have terminating sets supporting the mysteries of the ocean's linguistic structures. Some of the shorter-term sets include descriptors for climate change realignment and global cooling, an ice age, and ancient people and mummies. Unlike the presentations of films, these mummies themselves are the focus and apparent interest of the elites. The idea coming across from the data sets is that these mummies are either not human, or are mummies from some very far distant past, as in before the previous ice age. The data sets are pointing to the contradictions inherent in the elite PR statements of old shipwreck, move along nothing to be seen here, and the incredible and frightening, to the locals, amount of money and resources. The resources are going to include at least one, more or less permanent, power ship that will just sit and generate electricity for months. These sets include details of locals who will complain about the constant noise and air pollution from the power ship and will be displaced and forcibly relocated for their trouble. Other sets within the trouble sets supporting the mummy wreck include details describing an incident in which hundreds of people in flotation rings, life preservers, will drift in, on the currents, to sensitive waters and claim distressed mariner privileges. This episode is indicated to come near the end of the recovery tenure and to be very fortunate for the local population, as the timing induces the elites to offer up a number of concessions, including major power production facilities. These are all in an effort to be allowed to quietly extract the many tons of material from their mystery mummy wreck. ChinaPop. The Chinese taste for Bitcoin is showing up across both the ChinaPop entity and the markets entity as model space is progressed through July and the rest of summer. The data sets are forecasting that ChinaPop is going to subsume the global demand for Bitcoin in a rushing frenzy that will labeled, in China, as climbing the waterfall. This period is the first of 3 of very large waves of Chinese purchasing of Bitcoin for the next 18 months. Part of the drive to purchase Bitcoin within ChinaPop comes from the currency changes discussed in the previous Alta report. These sets continue to grow for the ongoing devaluation process if to accelerate, which, as may be expected, is indicated to cause yet more Bitcoin purchases. The ChinaPop entity has the Chinese authorities starting up a new cadre of trained investigators who will be schooled for international duties as the first step in their capital control COPS overseas initiative. Some of the problems showing up for this effort to return money to China is that it is going to run straight into the unrestrained activities of the Chinese criminal tongs associations. These sets are hinting that some newsflashes will be erupting as Chinese criminals versus Chinese police fights break out on foreign shores. The ChinaPop entity is forecasting that the growth of the Chinese commercial trading activities is about to overwhelm the Western world in much the same way that Bitcoin is now a Chinese-dominated cryptocurrency. These sets are pointing to a critical mass effect in which there will be so many of Chinese day traders that professionals in all the Western countries will be outnumbered 10 to 1. These sets are arguing for ChinaPop to take over the trading action around the planet by sheer weight of numbers. The data sets are forecasting that the Chinese authorities will be concentrating on converting to a consumer goods economic base for their internal consumption. A curious part of the internal consumption consumer goods includes anti-pollution measures both at personal and collective levels. These sets are indicating that the Chinese will consume anti-pollution remedies and devices in giant numbers and will even undertake giant, privately financed, air mining operations in an attempt to sell clean air at the same time as recovering valuable hydrocarbons. Other aspects of the conversion program include a push for employment by the central authorities, including language that hints at employee subsidies and other innovative thinking for achieving maximum employment. These sets are gaining so much in the way of emotional tone due to the rising presence of data sets containing social unrest and falling wages and economic downturn that all are also contributing to riots and regional-level disturbances. These are also indicated to cause at least one episode of transportation disruption when a regional labor issue will erupt into national attention as commodities and their distribution are impacted negatively for perhaps as long as 2 weeks. The disruptions have a greater preponderance of Southeast China references than others. The new data sets about the rising lands and the rare earths are also now containing geographic references to the disputed, new, islands in the South China Sea. These sets have internal cross-links over to new linguistic structures indicating that it may all happen again, as China sets about building another island chain. These and many other sets are in an area that we can call, China sets about Terra forming Earth. These sets have details going to the idea that GlobalPop will be viewing the first of mega-Chinese engineering, outside of China, projects appearing in a start late this summer, Northern Hemisphere. Other sets are pointing to both moving mountains and carving out sea mines. Sets in the sea mine supporting chain are indicating that a mineral discovery off the west coast of Ireland is going to receive both Chinese money and expertise in subsea engineering. While there are very large sets of new growth for China, given the extensively cross-linked sets around money, currencies, Bitcoin, and precious metals, the data would seem to be saying that everything else takes a back seat this summer. The ChinaPop sets are showing an increasing focus, indeed, even determination, to focus on money and economic movements over these next few months, especially the month of August. From the ChinaPop perspective, the goings-on in USAPop over August will be an entertainment boom as well as a big kick-in but to get moving for self-preservation as the data sets are showing a portrayal in the Chinese news machine of the Western powers being clueless. It is the clueless behavior of the Western powers that will actually be explaining many of the pending policies and actions of the Chinese authorities. In some of these, as we have recently witnessed with the Chinese central authorities moving to embrace Bitcoin EdNote, as forecast months ago in these reports, the data sets are suggesting that it is self-preservation as a power structure that has the Chinese authorities so worried about Western bad behavior with money and thus their inexplicable policies relative to gold and silver and soon, Bitcoin. The data sets are suggesting that the embrace of Bitcoin goes to the level of encouraging adoption of the currency. This encouragement by the central authorities is indicated to propel Bitcoin to Chinese mainstream. These sets are suggesting that this will begin in late 2016 and progress over the next several years. It is this Chinese central authorities' move into Bitcoin that is seemingly responsible for the shift from the emotive values of silver being associated with Bitcoin over to the emotional values more associated with gold. In essence, the data sets are describing Bitcoin going mainstream globally as we have entered the age when the emotional tone of ChinaPop will dominate the planet. Other aspects of ChinaPop showing as dominating these next few decades include engineering insofar as the construction of large projects. The data sets are continuing to grow in supporting positions under the Chinese authorities setting out to curb internal unrest by exporting Chinese young males abroad. They will do so, according to the new set growth of aspect attributes, by creating an army of the gray ants which will be their external to China infrastructure engineering and build-out forces. Seemingly organized as an army, the infrastructure core is indicated to include all forms of economic, required, infrastructure such as trains, planes, water, and housing. These sets are suggesting that over the next 30 years, the gray ants' presence in places such as Africa are going to be so consistent that they will have seemed to always have been there. USAPop watch for the impact of the infrastructure crises of summer 2016 to begin in earnest in July. Along with the labeled crisis periods, see markets entity, the datasets are forecasting that there will be a noticeable increase in natural disasters of the summer kind. These natural disasters impacting the USAPop are forecast to include many which will be natural, but not recognized as such as the underlying causal factor is showing as the Earth expansion effects. Examples of these will include grandstand collapses, indicated to happen both empty and with people in them. Other disasters include rides and attractions where hidden Earth expansion problems are described as surfacing with spectacular imagery within the resulting videos. Other examples include near-instant draining of water park facilities as the topography changes due to earthquakes. As an interesting note, within the earthquake section are 3 individual sets for female hero. These females hero sets are seemingly describing 3 separate heroines who will be forced into prominence by their unselfish, life-risking actions over the early summer. These instances are temporal markers for larger memes to emerge over this very pivotal time. We have some small descriptors for attributes of the women involved, and yes, it would seem that in spite of youth being one attribute, all of the women are adults. Further, we find that at least one will be an army girl with tats. Other attributes are forecast to be bringing thousands of marriage proposals to one of the women. The USAPop entity is forecasting that the heroines will not be the only show in town as the political fracturing is gaining new supporting sets at a very rapid rate. Note, the increasing rate of growth was coincident with the shift forward of the Bitcoin data sets recently. This fracturing will manifest, according to the data, as a violent schism that is described as people with torches leading the disenfranchised majority out of the emptying hall and down the road towards a meeting in a public park. Look out for the resurgence of an old-time economic religion within the ruling elite of USAPop as the idea of price controls will come to be floated about in front of the public as the hyperinflation starts. The idea used to be wage and price controls, but now, with no one working, the wage part of that equation will be absent from the discussion. Thus, the data is indicating that this will induce the producer class to shouting and wailing about the unfair burden that they will feel is theirs alone. These new sets are part of the long trailing response from officialdom period as the ruling elite get bashed over summer, manifesting now, and have to respond. Again, many new sets contain supporting sets for wonky, ill-advised, upside down, and bespoke stupid as being applied generally to these officialdom responses as the summer of crisis will be heating up through July and August. It is during these credit crises days that a much larger group of USAPop is forecast to get Bitcoin fever. While there are some gambling on price appreciation aspect attribute sets, it apparently will be the utility of Bitcoin that will be the drawing factor in the USAPop. This is showing up not within the mass of USAPop, but within sub-sets that are international and business-focused. The data sets are suggesting this increased use are within the supporting chain for the Bitcoin as international settlement vehicle cause it's too expensive to pass around gold set. The real estate whispering is showing as taking up more emotional energy from USAPop as the various local real estate bubbles give clear indications that they are deflating. Not only are the new data sets forecasting a dramatic drop in home sales, more or less across the nation, but we now also have new sets for drastic price reductions and seller incentive battles wherein some local markets are showing as hitting extreme levels of competition as the real estate sellers will find themselves in a position of paying for potential buyers in ways not previously seen in U.S. markets. There are large areas of growth in these subsets detailing all manner of advertising and promotions that are forecast as being far less than effective, but which are also characterized as both perceived as necessary and acts of desperation in desperate times. The real estate markets sets also include quite a bit of new supporting subsets about the lack of foreign buyers. Not only will the Chinese be disappearing from the buyers' side of the equation, they are forecast as becoming net sellers of USA real estate over the next 4 years. Further, there are other sets for the drying up of the South American buyers as the economies in that part of the world that are dollar-dependent become deflationary. Again, many of the sudden and must-sell offerings in the southern USA real estate markets, including Miami and other FL locations, will be due to dollar deflation pressures on home country economies. This juxtaposition of the ballooning of foreign sellers into the market just as the foreign buyers also disappear is indicated to participate in causing very large levels of depressed prices for high-end real estate. By this is meant that the initial price drops in some local markets are going to exceed 45% off of last year's price. Given the rising emotional tone values and the negative forecast, the data would seem to be arguing for a breakout into the open press media that the economy, at least real estate, is tanking or submerging. The data sets are showing that a media discussion about the high-end real estate markets going into a stall before the fall these last few months is indicated to now move to the falling and bleeding prices stage of the market collapse. Much of the language here is reflective of the tone seen in the AustraliaPop entity where their local Joe Sixpack is feeling pretty satisfied and protected in the warm haze of the lazy summer and beer while contemplating contemptuously the misfortunes of the local rich. Again, the data sets are showing that the crashing sound that Joe Sixpack is hearing will soon be in his own neighborhood as the general real estate market meets headlong the onrushing avalanche of credit freeze. The data sets are providing a picture that is difficult to describe. Within this linguistic image are sets that include rolling and crushing to describe the motion of the travel of the credit freeze through the system. A good analogy would be having one's veins freezing along their length at a rapid but observable speed. The credit freeze is showing as being centric, which is to say, beginning in several regional centers and spreading from each center loci in all directions locally. There are also detail sets pointing toward national lenders going dark and silent over the course of only a few days. These descriptor sets have details showing the lights-out effect at real estate offices and auto dealerships and retail stores including complete malls as daily operating credit is forecast to dry up like a shallow pond in the summer sun. In some of the detail sets the economic activity is described as being reduced 77% over just a few weeks. The rapid and visible implosion of nearly everyone's local economic activity is going to be rising to media attention over these next couple of months as the cessation of construction projects, even recently started ones, and the curtailing of business expansions, and the cancellation rates of damn near all business categories from hotels to boats to appliances to cars to houses to hospital beds to vacations to weddings to anything short of funerals, are showing as escalating to the point that even the mainstream propaganda media will be directly and embarrassed by the impacts on their public face and operations, work business. A significant impact is indicated to hit USAPop in the face as devaluation schemes are being discussed by media when talking about the dollar. These discussions on corporation-controlled broadcast media are going to be misdirecting the focus, but the data is forecasting that the emotional impact will nonetheless get through to the point that there is going to be a cluster of media reports about long lines for gold-silver at retail level in a number of places in the USA. Some of these sets are also focusing on Texas where the Get Share Gold meme will be spreading like wildfire and some of the gold and silver sales outlets are indicated to use the wildfire metaphor within their advertising. These sets are suggesting that part of the propulsion for the Texas gold rush is going to be the emotional energy within the area coalescing around the idea of Republic of Texas independence. The data sets are also showing that a considerable amount say close to 28% of the emotional impact and duration values for the Independence Texas meme is forecast to be coming from other states and even other nations' peoples who would like to emigrate to an independent Republic of Texas. Other sets within the supporting linguistic structure for submerging also are including economy, and now, newly arrived, a plethora of additions to the failure of the social contract subsets. These sets are suggesting that a revisiting re-examination of old economic policies is going to be forced upon the mainstream propaganda media, as the USAPop is going to be gripped by intriguing details of near-recent past mistakes of the federal government. Some of these new sets are forecasting that Oklahoma City bombing and other past deeds of the government will be examined in such a manner that these old stories of misdeeds will be new again. The larger failure of the social contract sets are arguing for a conjunction of unexpected, not imaginable, not able to be planned for, not on the radar, circumstances that are showing up as producing discord at precisely the wrong moment in a plot against USAPop. The circumstances are described as special to the environment of the intended victims as well as being bizarre and, when reported, widely disbelieved. While the new aspect attribute sets are showing that the circumstances are beyond belief and wildly incredible, the data nonetheless shows that the bizarre reports will be factual, and further, that they will actually be accepted by USAPop in spite of the continuously stated descriptor of unbelievable. As the data flows through model space, the image suggested by the growth patterns of the data is of an ongoing situation that may drag on for days. Within the section of USAPop, the movement within model space occupies slightly less than 18 days. Within the data accretion patterns, there appears to be a forecast for fouled-up plot agenda to be reaching into the minds of the mainstream USAPop via live coverage being net funneled via social media. Much of the other new sets are showing up in support of a new phenomenon being unveiled as it is being created. The detail sets for these descriptors are confusing, dense, and extensively cross-linked over to the SpaceGoatFarts entity, where the terminating sets can be inferred to be point to something not yet named. So the idea coming across is that we have yet again an unknown-dominated set trying to describe a social phenomenon that has not yet appeared, and is both novel, new, and, as of this writing, unnamed. What is known about our unnamed social phenomenon pending in the near-term future is that its effects will be very intensely felt, and cause long-lasting multiple-generation changes in the general social contract. Other hinted impacts include a recasting of how USAPop perceives itself now based on new history being provided. A new area of growth within the USAPop is centered around the Southwest in a broad geographic sense. While the cause is not quite clear at this point, the resulting emotional tone spike is pointing towards an event or circumstance that will produce very large response in the national population. The data sets are showing that earth changes are involved, and that further, the conscience created will be drawing in the federal government response teams. These teams are indicated to run into physical walls and other obstacles to their agenda while the circumstances of the disruption continues. There are some hints that technology disruptions will be involved in the incident event's manifestation. Further examples within the data of regional, former, power centers that are to suffer degradation as a result of the credit freeze include Hollywood. The data is indicating that the Southern California movie and other media industry is indicated to take a major hit, pun not intended, but it was in the data, as the credit freeze sweeps the banking system. The idea within the IM and ST sets shows that a sour stomach feeling is going to be forcing many of the speculators in that industry into hospitals, as the cancellation wave is described as rolling over the Hollywood Hills and drying up the income for the E Valley. At some of the processing levels for the Hollywood distribution system, the data is showing that the breakaway inflation has spiked the costs involved in making movies here in USA. Other Hollywood issues are forecast to include Chinese super competition for foreign markets, as the Chinese movie industry will become what the data sets are describing as a truth machine that begins to detail the crimes of the Western hegemony. These sets are suggesting that within a shockingly short time, the Chinese movie industry will be outproducing, for foreign consumption, Hollywood at ratios of 10,000 to 1. The detail sets show that very soon a single month of movie releases from China will be more than all films ever released from Hollywood. And the majority will be anti-Western dollar, criminal empire propaganda films. Expect to see many of the upcoming Chinese films explore the great financial panic of 21st century America. Other aspects of Chinese, overtaken, activities are going to include travel, for leisure, as the Chinese capital juggernaut rolls over the cruise business at a global level. This rollover is also showing as including dominating both the itinerary, as well as the guest manifesto. In the case of the latter, this dominating of the passenger list has sets in support of national patriotism, pride language popping up in various markets as the Chinese passengers will be pricing out the locals. This situation is forecast to create incidents in which patriotism and bad behavior go wild. The detail sets include fights and international incidents and trade repercussions. As may be recalled, our previous Alta reports have long been forecasting that regional power outages would be a defining characteristic of the summer of 2016, at least for USAPop. Within the power outages sub-sets we have new growth for conflicts that will erupt at a number of levels, including on the street, and within the boardrooms as the power outages are described as eating the spare, national, capacity. The data sets show this to be a long-term problem that gets worse by the month after the first initial flurry of the summer incidents. These sets are also in support of the heat wave and the resulting infrastructure damage. The whole of the infrastructure damage subsets within the USAPop are going to other climate change damage that is indicated to come back blow back with exaggerated damage as the previous fix, which may involve a dam, has a pending blowout. There are many subsets that are suggesting the explosion to be inside a major electrical power plant. The new growth in these sets have details about excessive heat that will not only spark fires but also sag, major, high-tension lines at a critical time with a result that the lines, conduits to another state, will break and the shock to the power plant will initiate machine core failure. This does not show as a nuclear power plant, rather as hydroelectric or gas plant. The shortages issue is indicated to be greater than just the electrical energy system in that we have subsets for shortages in foods, as in specific food types items, and precious metals. Other sets show that rotating, consumer, item shortages are going to lay over the Western world, as the credit freeze hits producers, and the shipping distribution system. Part of the new growth in the credit freeze sets includes retirement grab in which the data are showing several announcements by officialdom that to secure and safeguard the retirement accounts of the USAPop, these must be converted to something that the government can protect. These sets as well as the subsequent sets for near riots and officialdom offices overturned trashed and federal retirement agencies offices destroyed, trucks driven through walls, that sort of thing, are all interconnected both directly held and via cross links over to the markets entity for a breakout of the precious metals as off-grid money. These sets are part of USAPop and markets entity sets that go to the idea of first lines and daily queuing for silver gold across the USA that then turn vicious as the supplies become exhausted in mere days. At this point in the movement of model space, the data sets are showing that a number of breakdowns and government failures start to pile up on the lousy economy that then once again push the population into precious metals. It is at this point that the government, especially the banksters, find themselves in a deep bind as they are unable to try helicopter money due to their fear that the population would simply run up the prices of gold even higher with the delivered fiat currencies. What is indicated to shock the monkey, freak out officialdom, during the middle of summer is the dollar, following the euro, falling downstairs. These downward falls are indicated to prompt significant changes across the social order. Some signs of these changes are not only the lines for silver gold, but also the $20 days, upward in price, for silver, and $500 days, in gold. These movements in price are indicated to be altering the political background of the USAPop and causing severe strain among the ruling elite, criminals. The strain indicators for this period will be seen in the bad behavior and dying parts of major banks. The falling down behavior of the dollar over summer is forecast to create a situation where the population begins to develop its own precious metals exchange system as the banks and officialdom are left to rule over the seized engine of the paper debt economy. Within this developing system, the real price discovery of gold and silver is being described as being several times the D price being officially quoted. Markets. The language accruing to the Bitcoin subsets now includes spreading wings, on fire, fire below, fire above, fire, in the belly, fire, filling, arteries, favorable winds, fresh winds, fair seas, flying high, basking, in the sun, successful husbandry, growth, and many others of similar emotional tones, all going to the idea that over the course of July, and the halving, that Bitcoin as the global people's currency is going to do very well indeed. As model space is progressed through the year from late June through July, first we encounter linguistic renderings suggesting that Bitcoin will be in the 1000s, as in worth over 1,000 USA dollars but less than 1999 USA dollars, for such a short time as to have the time period itself become the object of the conversations. So the implications to be taken from this is that very soon, as in perhaps by end of July, Bitcoin prices will be over 1,000 USA dollars, and that the transit through to over 2,000 USA dollars will be remarkably brief to the point of eliciting conversations about the speed of price rise. Now, note that the speed of passage of Bitcoin through the thousands of dollars could easily be 6 months and still be very brief according to how the words are defined within our lexicon. The new sets include language for insane valuations, and hyper gambling, in BTC, and many other sets going to the idea of the global population being in competition to buy bitcoins. Now it must be noted that this is not referencing, in the majority of sets, a real intention to either gamble or invest or speculate on Bitcoin as a potentially rising value asset, but rather these sets are directly held descriptors going to the idea of selling local fiat currencies for Bitcoin as a way of transferring the value and the risks out of their local paper or local digits. Further interesting alterations in how Bitcoin is being perceived and valued and its emotional qualifiers are coming out of recent processing as Bitcoin has become more global as the center of its sales activity has shifted to China. The accompanying shift in perception and value is forecast to include the idea of a nascent global pop ideal now starting to form in the actual global pop. This is perhaps best expressed as the concept of Bitcoin gaining emotional cash globally just because it is a global people's issued currency. That it may be also considered as airsats or even illegal depending on geographic location and local authorities does not seem to alter its rising perceptual value as a global, outside the now dying, system, people's currency. The subtleties of the emotional shift are masking its forecast importance. Further, there are new aspect attribute sets for yellow light, being reflected from gold, and golden aura, and gold-like, and glimmering, and many other gold attributes that are accrued to the Bitcoin sets as model space progresses through July and August. Within these new growth patterns are gold-like attributes far too numerous to note here. The tone of the Bitcoin sets have now firmly shifted from those of silver over to those of gold. Also note that this is occurring while many of those attributes within the silver subsets are also changing rapidly. Within the silver subsets there are many new aspect attribute sets going to the idea that silver will be viewed by the population, globally, as a precaution against calamity. This new status is indicated to rise from Chinese television and the Chinese central authorities' advertising to their own people. There are many new sets showing that a push to own silver will be main theme of the campaign as the idea of silver as daily money will be reintroduced by Chinese central authorities. A significant portion of the language is building around the set for central sincerity within which there are indicators that the Chinese officialdom is scared shitless about the Chinese population being caught by surprise when global currencies collapse. Ethereum does show up in the data, however the sets that are accruing to its linguistic structure are all emotionally hot up until very recently. This state of heat within the emotional tone values, such as duration, energy, intensity, impact, length, temporally, of impact, et al., is such that no useful forecast could be made, however, now that the ether is launched, and there are now appearing negative articles and discussions. With a victim involved such as those who own ether coins, there are now emotional divergences and nuances which are what allow for the forecast language to emerge. That said, this is a very significant turn in the data sets as it implies that ether has legs into the future. Most altcoins have yet to even get close to this stage within model space. The other notable exception is Ripple, which has taken on an identifier label that has so many connotations as to be more readily found in the datasets, albeit only infrequently associated with the Ripple altcurrency. You, the reader concerned with financial markets, and economics, and politics, are living through the reason that last month's Alta Report was named Wild Ride. The naming of these reports is a part of the processing of the data sets, and given the level of emotional intensity, and the incredible duration of impact of these days, this current report could have been named the 1616 Days in July. It was not so labeled for a variety of reasons, but that will not stop the fiat currencies and in global markets from living and thus naming this month as those 16 days, give or take 3, in July and the wild ride in markets. Model space is a 3-dimensional scatter graph. It does not ever indicate a starting day or a precise time as such. What we get is a general span of time in which the emotional forecast language will appear in the media. As such, we have a very broad possible range for the location of our 16 days in July. The first could be as early as the intended publication date of this report, which is to say, July 5, 2016. The second, and more probable, is July 11, which is the day following the halving of the mining return on Bitcoin. The first of these dates represents the largest initial bulge of this data set, while the July 11th day represents the peak of the emotional tone sums across the entire range of July relative to the subsets in the linguistic sets referenced. In other words, July 11th has a forecast emotional tone that is close to the emotional tone of the 16 days in July subset. This 16 days in July subset is being described as a very significant temporal marker for 5 generations, 100 plus years, as well as being a point of shattering of the existing system. These 16 days in July are so labeled as the data suggests that some future histories and historians will name our pivot point as those 16 days in July of 2016. Breaking away from price controls and towards free markets and the resulting chaos and dollar degradation are all within the labels for the new descriptor sets accruing over this last period of processing. These involve new definitions for words commonly employed and now, according to the datasets, are going to be demonstrated. These to be demonstrated words are including collapse and shattered confidence. Detail layers are providing very large sets of unknown elements for a late September surprise that may involve energy sector such as an electrical system shutdown that has a large number of cross-links over to the East Coast, USA, markets. This is heavily cross-linked, shows before or on the September equinox, and is a totally new set with a few detail sets presenting the images of a very disjointed picture puzzle of a long-lasting blackout that will also shut down both the transport and the data transport, including lasers, which will have the impact of stalling and misdirecting the algos as well as causing some of the high-frequency trading systems to freak out. Of course, the whole level of the September freak out has to be understood in relation to how the data shows summer in the markets entity. As both July and August progress, the markets aka paper debt trading vehicles are gaining sets for old, tired, geriatric, breaking, down, internally, bad smell, rotting skins, tired blood, sore bowels, from too many harsh evacuations, and many other, much more disgusting body references, all in the same emotional tone of weakened state complaints and general body breakdown. New sets growing across model space are now using the depression word. The data sets are showing that not only the alternative woo-woo media, but now the MSM, the pundits, and even the person on the street are going to be using the D word to describe the global economy. Other sets are showing that there will be modifiers to this word, frequently very rude, or crude, but accurate. Some of the more accurate aspects showing as creeping into daily conversations over the next few years will include the central banksters, as in the central banksters depression. In the case of the central banksters as a set, there are increasing amounts of possessive language emerging relative to the attributes within the sets. This, and the changes in the emotional quantifiers, allow us to forecast the upcoming shift of mental imagery and emotional attachment within the greater global pop about the central banksters. Whereas it was merely a decade ago that the Fed chair was treated as close to the king of the world, the data is now forecasting that banksters will be soon shocked to be recognized and publicly berated and beaten. Much of the new aspect attribute sets accruing to the depression word are indicating that there are going to be huge numbers of solutions proffered over the next 2 years, all of which are useless and meaningless in the scope of the depression being experienced. The data shows that the political class, especially the new generation of want-to-be-s, are going to be especially egregious in spewing nonsense related to ongoing, crushing economic woes in former dollar empire. The data sets are showing that the trade wars language and economic flow of capital are forecast to go into crisis as the economic activity, mainly in the USA, is grinding to a complete halt. Further, the depression language is accompanied by the hyperinflation language growth that jumps into the public consciousness as the Federal Reserve banksters go into public panic mode. The data sets are clearly indicating that the discussion of hyperinflation in previous Alta reports have now shifted into its manifestation period. The data had, over the course of this last year, held that the summer of 2016 would have first the response period, by the officialdom, followed by the panic period, by the officialdom. The response period is an underlying and background meme running across the last half of June and all of the rest of summer. Then the panic period begins with the 16 days in July. These sets are showing that the 16 days is going to include the first burst of hyperinflation, coming from the Federal Reserve banksters. The hyperinflation language is specifically focusing on the Federal Reserve banksters, however the ramifications are indicated to be almost instantly global. In the side effect sets are some indicating that the Italian banking system starts a dramatic crumbling that is described as so severe as to impoverish the Vatican as the hidden debts become revealed, and the pledges are sought to be honored. While not directly part of the hyperinflation subsets, the scramble, desperate to get out of fiat, currencies sets are pointing toward the very near-term future when new ersatz currencies including digital offerings, blockchain clones, and mock metals, and regional tokens, and many others are going to be manifesting in a reality near you. While all of these are linked to the dying dollar which is doing so from hyperinflation, it is the failure of confidence in the fiat masters, Federal Reserve banksters, that is our proximate cause for action appearing in the data. The increasing intensity of the economic crisis is a growth factor for these new currencies appearing globally, however it is the bizarre behavior of the fiat masters, as people, that is showing as propelling the spread of fiat abandonment. Of course, in the midst of the ersatz currencies boom, there is the dominating, hyperdrive, pun intended, rocket ship that is Bitcoin. Over these last few Alta reports the data sets have been bringing up automobile industries and the car dealerships as a global system as being the next vein to coagulate. These sets are also in supporting positions for the car dealerships, in USAPop, being converted to other uses. New growth continues to point to shut doors and squatting families, and gangs, who will take over the former dealerships. In some of the longer-term sets we have food production and warehousing space as uses for these car sales sites. Within the USAPop the pivot point for the implosion of the dealership system is shown as being the millennials and their distaste for both driving and car ownership, also, probably a lot of that is fueled by student debt loads. Globally, the data shows the depression that settles over consumer goods, excepting China, is due in no small part to the chaos that is going to dominate the global financial system and all currencies for these next 20 years. The data sets for the price rise in silver, specifically, have supporting sets that include language around air gaps. These air gaps are the best our descriptors can do to describe the jumps up in relative price, in dollars, over very short periods of time. Whereas the data sets do have descriptors for stair steps, these air gaps are apparently their own form of price action, likely not called that by the professional traders. These air gaps have very distinct sets of emotional sums indicating that the jump up, in dollar prices, will be so large and the gap in the air under the price so huge as to cause traders to faint and to vomit. The former from sheer disbelief and the latter because they actually do believe it. The data sets are also describing the air gaps as being so large as to create generational fortunes in mere hours. The data descriptors for silver have 3838 as being the only number between 18.88, which is also described as a barrier and the new all-time highs. So, noting that these sets are linguistic and not numeric-based, and that the numerals come in via linguistic structures much as though being reported after the fact using these numbers and our psychics bring in the headlines, and thus the numbers, the 3838 number for silver is especially interesting as it has a correlation via cross-links over to the Bitcoin sets. This correlation would have Bitcoin be in the 1000s, at or near the time that silver goes to 3838. The markets entity continues to grow data, now almost all in the immediacy data types, that the insurance industry is going to be destroyed by the stagflation that will be settling in over global economic activity. Or already has been, so destroyed, as the datasets are suggesting that a wave of bankruptcy and defaults is going through this industry beginning this summer, and continuing through the rest of this year and most of next as the various majors will be tottering, teetering, and reeling from the crashing economic burdens of negative rates, falling currencies, and escalating claims. The data sets are showing that the major banks, including the top 20 banks globally, are going to be rocked by failures across the rest of 2016. These failures are showing as being losses to the credit system and a major contributing component to the developing credit freeze. The data sets are showing that the cryptocurrencies are the default payment method that takes a big jump forward as the various forms of central bankster tricks all fail to work. The idea coming across from the data sets is of a universe homage to Bucky Fuller in that just when the system collapses, we already have invented that which replaces it. The data sets are showing that as the fiats die, a path of least resistance, at that point, leads to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. The predominant is Bitcoin, but others are showing up within the data sets as having useful life both regionally and in vertical markets. There are also indicators of smart cryptocurrencies coming, which will be smart objects able to identify their owners, and to act on instructions and timing. These smart cryptocurrencies are also, like Bitcoin, described as being a Western invention that ends up being dominated by ChinaPop, and also captivating ChinaPop. These are described in longer-term data sets and are several years out, but are also described as natural outgrowths of the time, energy, money that will be going into Bitcoin and crypto world as the ancient paper scripts die off. The data sets have geographic references for South America and some parts of Africa, such as South Africa, as being crypto centers. These sets would have fiat currencies failures being the prompting motivation in the former, and the rising Southern Ocean trade routes for the latter. In the case of the Southern Ocean trade routes, there are Terra entity links suggesting that the heat sinks and heat distribution system of the planet enters a period, to humans, of irregularity such that new routes are needed, and South Africa becomes a major tradeway station due to location. The speed at which the failing fiat currencies plummet is indicated to force the shipping business into Bitcoin, and as a result, South Africa becomes a crypto hub for the region. Yet more data sets are going to the adoption of Bitcoin as the fiats fail across the dollar empire world. Again, it is the primal archetypes for food, shelter, health, and well-being that are firmly linked into the mass adoption of Bitcoin. These are indicating that the collapsing, purchasing power of the fiats are going to grab the unaware humans by their intestines and wrench them into fear in ways not before seen. The not before seen is actually a bespoke term that is going to the idea of peer pressure and the piling in effect as the fear starts compounding itself. In past fiscal crises globally, there are physical limits to release safety that would include the amount of gold or silver available to be bought, which, while true also in this pending a crisis, is now augmented by the Bitcoin rescue effect about to be witnessed globally. This will consist of the idea of few, I was able to get my money wealth out of paper and into Bitcoin, usually followed by just before XXX. This is akin, in a loose way, to the wealth effect so touted by the central banksters. This psychological state of safety is going to be unique to this particular global financial crisis as, unlike former crisis where the limits are the availability of gold and silver locally, now, Bitcoin will be perpetually local and available. It will be merely a matter of how much fiat is paid for how little Bitcoin. The datasets are quite clear that what propels Bitcoin into the safety net of the upcoming financial fiscal crisis will also be the same characteristics that will make its use as a settlement vehicle so attractive later for larger capital payments, the ease of transport. Bitcoin will, as has been forecast in these reports for the last year, move emotionally into the same level as gold. SpaceGoatFarts in the longer-term data sets accretion patterns are some consistent references that are binding the northwest coast of Australia, that part that could be described as facing India, and the emergence of a sound money system that further is described as having global penetration. The sound money system is specifically that, a system in that it has a Bitcoin-based, international transfer component. Note that this is going to be a natural evolution, so it is very doubtful that the sound money to be adopted locally in this region following a very large silver vein exposure will start out with Bitcoin attached. But the view being presented by the longer-term data sets is that at some time in the early 2020s, this sound money will break out of its local boundary and start going global. At that point, it can be forecast that Bitcoin will be the international transfer mechanism. It can also be inferred that the transfer is going to be a ratio of silver to Bitcoin with no intervening currencies. This is revealed to us in the language rising in the supporting chain as it will be a real mind and mouth teaser, to wit, OZA's BTCD, which, at that point in the future, will translate to Australian silver ounces to Bitcoin decibits ratio. Other sound money economy sets include geographic references to Ireland and Eastern Europe. In the sets with Ireland as a leading geographic reference, we still are growing supporting sets for the slope as an underseas project that is to be establishing EuropeanPop future. The data sets have many cross-links back to older language referring to the Black Irish sand hogs of USA, and these sets are being updated to focus on a new, global affecting, project involving the underseas Irish working man. There are several deep core cross-links over to the SpaceGoatFarts entity where the terminating sets are suggesting that future comedic entertainment will have focus on the typical underseas Irish extraction worker and his/her travails. The entertainment value of the slope project aside, the datasets are showing that coastal Ireland will be one of the regional sound money loci over the next 10 years. Oh. Turns out that software, aka computer-based automation, will not only eat the world, but will also be consuming religion. The long-term data sets are suggesting that governments, though mostly USA deep state, will be employing computer technology-based sensors that will be an attempt to develop a computerized force sensor. These force sensor arrays are described as sort of reaching into the aether to extract knowledge about the immediate local environment. These new sets are painting a picture of deployment of portable force sensors around the planet to ascertain if is manifesting appearing. The data is not clear as to what the deep state is seeking with their new technology, but there are many internal cross-links over to the wireless telepathy and secret conversations sets of past Alta Reports. The new growth areas within this computer dimension sniffer include subsets going to the idea that in spite of the developing global financial and economic chaos, there will be a consistent and concentrated effort on the part of these involved governments to sniff out the but sought-after manifestations. There are internal cross-links over to CERN and its LHC. Within all of the sets there is a focus on computerized God stuff sensors that are described as supplanting the organized part of organized religion. In some of the language, the interpretation could easily be for a cell phone to the other life imagery coming from the detail sets. These devices are within sets painting a picture of religion supplanted. Also there are subsets indicating that, at least for a while following their introduction, there will be some humans who abuse the such that we would say that they were addicts to these devices or process. This is again one of those instances in which there are no currently meaningful labels and the data is filled with references to unknown. The SpaceGoatFarts entity has new sets for a disquiet that will be evident or manifest or demonstrated by animals more or less all around the planet. This disquiet is going to also be perceived by some humans, that is to say, both the unusual behavior by animals will be observed by humans, as well as some humans directly perceiving the big uneasy. This big uneasy is showing in the data as lasting but a short time, but that period is at least long enough that the humans around the animals pick up on it and then go discuss it such that it gets picked up by the alt media. The data would have this brief period of animal jittery behavior also be observed by scientists and researchers as their collection apparatus goes wonky, delivers obviously conflicting or out-of-range results. The jittery, anxious animal days, weeks, sets are forming up as though a temporal marker, but if so the range would have to be 5 or more years out. Previous ALTA reports, going back a long number of years, have had sets that described food riots in the USA, specifically in the Maryland area. These food riots had the side effect of having a break-in through a back fence into a deep underground military base, secret, that was within walking distance of some major urban areas in Maryland. As part of the side effects sets, the data described the rioters not only finding and looting food, but also finding a huge cache of secret government documents, and deep space, alien stuff. Now these sets have new growth in both the USAPop and SpaceGoatFarts entity wherein some of the details of the to be liberated, in the future, documents are describing a decade-long series of experiments on military-dependent children, in the 1960s, in which epigenetic dynamics were being studied. Without regard to the studies referenced, the data is indicating that the liberated documents will reveal secrets about the resulting epigenetic triggers that were activated across the baby boom generation. That may explain a lot. In a definite back-to-the-future sort of moment, the data sets are forecasting that a researcher will uncover the truth about lightning this summer. And this is showing as providing a huge boost to the new electric sets as the base science will become available for the inspired guess or intuitive insight that will be sparking off the new electrics over this next year. Additionally, the discovery is showing as leading to a very cheap and very effective form of lightning protection and anti-electrocution device. This how lightning really works discovery is also indicated to form the base science breakthrough for the force field technology breakthrough of the 2020s and beyond. In the early days of this work, the data brought forward the unknown sets, and the officially denied sets to such an extent that the interpretation demanded the creation of the SpaceGoatFarts entity just as a part of trying to manage the complexity. There have been other instances of focused data arising continually throughout the years, but recently there have been very few such sets within the SpaceGoatFarts entity area. Now we have the emergence of the word force as in force field, and with specifically that meaning. These new sets involving force field is showing across the SpaceGoatFarts entity and now is acting as an originating source for cross-links that are going to terminating sets in both markets and the GlobalPop entity. In the markets entity, the data is of the longer-term type with a 7 to 10-year time period before we start seeing some of the forecast production pieces from these new force field technologies. In some of the descriptors, we have a lot of the word disrupting and displacing and disturbing of market segments by the introduction of some of these technologies based on the manipulation, by waved electricity, of standing, dynamic wave, force fields. Examples provided by the data include giant lifts and giant forklifts being replaced by energy cushions or pads. The new industry will wrestle with the labels for a while. Other examples include force field barges in which containers are rafted together by force fields such that they can be lifted and shifted en masse with no apparent connections between them. The longer-term sets that go out as far as 2029 through 2039 are describing a world in which energy and force are not connotative cousins, and in fact, the linguistic nuance of the variance of types and flavors of force fields is showing as being core to the language of work at that time. The subtle differences in force field types and flavors repetitiously appears, and the electrical interaction is described as becoming its own collegiate path. So Tampa Joe-esque girls may become force field engineers. The very long-term data sets that can be followed through the new electrics appearance also include the areas of new materials handling which, for all intents and purposes, we will call replicators hereafter, is indicated to make penetration into social mainstream starting in mid-2024 and be firmly established by early 2031. The data sets describe the appearance of the first replicator and the billionth as occurring on separated by only a few months in time. The issue apparently will be that there will be a non-replicatable force field control component in the early units, and that barrier will be overcome, according to the very long-term data, within only months. Thereafter, replicators can replicate themselves and we are off to the AI technology races as every home becomes a technology's laboratory for, almost, no cost. Returning to closer to the ever-present now, the data sets continue to build for the flyby, or cruise-by of the Earth by the space alien, tourist ship. These sets continue to gain new aspect attribute sets for the inhabitants of the overflown region to be wide-eyed, dumbstruck, slathering, drooling, fainting, shitting themselves and sometimes all of these at once at the sight of the space alien cruise ship and its passengers staring back at them. Probably not the best way to present humanity to visitors. Conclusion: shock the monkey. Monkey mind, that is. Timing is really everything. Get your timing wrong on anything in life and it is as though you did not even show up. Which, as we all have heard for decades, is half of the recipe for success. Success as we understand that term, that is to say, as it has been defined by the powers that be (TPTB) over these last dozen decades is about to undergo a transformation. The powers that be (TPTB) are ruled by their monkey minds, their focus, but hands stuck in the jars trying to grasp the world of numbers and money. But now, the transformation is upon us. What once was up, will now be down. Those underfoot, will now be kicking ass. The data sets are arguing for a pivotal point in future history to be unfolding before our eyes, or rather, around our skins as we, the aware, are neither sleeping through it, nor merely viewing it, but rather swimming in it, living it, glorifying in the pure shibui, perfection, of it all. And it is happening now. Those preparations that have been made, and are ready, are there. Those not, well, they are not, so just let it go. You have the now to live in, and within this upcoming now, there is opportunity in crisis, as the Chinese translators would have it, or rather, as some prefer it, chance favors the prepared mind. Now is that point at which the unprepared mind will look with envy on the generational fortunes being created over these next 20 years and wonder how it came to be, and many of them will attribute it all to luck. The difference in luck and timing is only in the mind, and the truth is that all of life, and everything, is timing, even luck. To be aware of timing means one can seize the opportunities presented by universe that others will not see, and thus they will label it all as luck. Enjoy your luck, you've earned it, but remember. Universe provides what we need, not what we want, even when it appears that we are getting what we want. Sneaky universe will have its surprises. It likes shocking the monkey too.